What's happening, people? We've just finished filming episode 6 of the Archive podcast. The first guest came on and spoke to us and educated us around the whole coaching and VBT side of things. That was Chris Toombs. So this podcast, we learned a lot, didn't we, Dan? If you didn't know, Chris Toombs is Dan's uni lecturer from uni.
Yeah. Like obviously I know Chris from university, and that's where I got exposed to kind of like his sort of like coaching philosophy, his education sort of style and that kind of thing. But obviously ultimately that would have some influence on my actual, coaching philosophy, my style of coaching, my area of sort of like biases inevitably come from Chris and others. So it was really interesting to get him on. I know, like, just to refresh over everything and just to get it across on the podcast and like sort of like give people an insight into like where I get some of my beliefs from, and like just learning about like whatever he's got to say. Really, it was really interesting to have him on. And
yeah, and for me, it was never really been introduced to velocity-based training or had the chance to chat with Chris before. It was nice to get a different insight onto training, because I've kind of been stuck and between the whole percentage-based mixed with reps in reserve and RPE as a training metric for gauging progression. But to have some actually solidified objective feedback for it with the whole VBT side of things could be something that I'm going to look to implement, and with my own training first of all, and then be a little guinea pig to try and run to some of my clients and help better their training development as a whole. So it was really good to have him on the podcast. We'll do a little plug for him now. So you can
find him on socials. Chris Toombs 71 on Instagram and Twitter. So that's Toombs TOMBS.
All the links will be in the description.
Yeah, all the we discussed like where you can find like a little bit more on Chris later in the podcast, where like we can just like put all of his links in the description, because I know he has some like coaching education bits going on. So yeah, happy days.
Let's get into the podcast.
Here we go.
You've been coming home the back end of this week.
How's that worked out?
Mate, just
lockdown anyway.
Wild. Just sent home, mate. Just sent home. Everything's locked. There's no sport going on, is there?
No.
There's only obviously New Zealand rugby going on at the moment. That's pretty much it.
Yeah, New Zealand's just going to keep getting better.
yeah, exactly. Everyone else is just going to struggle to catch up. So yeah, we'll see how it all turns out. But things look like they're starting to return to semi-normality in the sports world, thankfully. So
yeah, I know they've got that, especially with the UFC. They've got the Fight Island and stuff.
Yeah, they're doing some cool stuff. That's the thing that's happening. A lot of sports are scrambling around to find solutions, basically, and that's the sports that you're interested in, like the combat stuff, mate. They're fair play. Awesome. Love that.
If we've got to buy an island and run our own shit, then we'll do it.
That's right. Get it done, mate. Get it done. See how you get on.
For time, are we looking for time? Are you like, because these usually run about an hour? Is that good?
Yeah, fine, mate. Yeah, no worries.
Days. Right, we're rolling, bro. Like,
yeah, all good.
Okay.
Yeah. So we've added in a sort of intro. Basically, just summarize your sort of like
straight into the details.
Experiences in the field. Yeah, just for the viewers listening.
Okay. So from my point of view, obviously, thanks ever so much for having me on. It's nice to share my experiences with coaches who are, looking to spread the word. 25 years in the industry, so I don't want to give away my age, but started working out in the fitness industry as a personal trainer. I did 7 years in London, built some, a nice little business in fairness, but for me, the kind of coaching itch that I wanted to scratch was in sport. So I had at that point in time, the internet wasn't exactly very old. Just made a speculative application for a job with Leicester Tigers Academy. Seemed to have done well enough at the interview stage to get myself a role at Leicester Tigers at the time, which was 2002. Very fortunate. England were winning the World Cup in 2003. I know that's not good for you to hear as a Welsh lad, but the reality was it was a great sort of baptism of fire into professional sport, working with some pretty high profile players at the time. And just, the acceleration of learning was quite ridiculous, actually, under a guy named Pete Atkinson, who was a kind of my first mentor. He ended up, or has just literally got the job at Wasps as head of performance. So in terms of that, so sort of the 20 years ago, left the Leicester Tigers under a little bit of club turmoil, I suppose. The long-term head coach, Dean Richards, got the sack for whatever reason in 2004. And me and a couple of others chose to move on alongside the others who got fired, which was quite an interesting time. But ended up at the Cardiff Blues. I had 9 seasons at Cardiff with an academy role primarily in the first 2 or 3 years, and then ended up transitioning through into the senior program with some of the players who had worked with me pretty extensively in the academy. So that was a kind of a golden period, I guess, in some respects for the Blues. It was a pretty good side between 2007 and 2010, winning the EDF Cup, which was taken a little bit more seriously in those days. And we went to the Amlin final in 2010, playing against Toulon in Marseille, which was a great experience. So I spent 9 years at the Cardiff Blues. Transitioned across the pond in 2013, 2014, went to America. Thankfully, I married wisely. I got an American wife. So kind of went through the green card process back in 2014. Got myself a job working for a commercial business that primarily was looking to grow rugby in North America. Mm-hmm. So from that point of view, I was exposed to not only grassroots rugby, but also kind of high-end rugby. Worked a little bit alongside the USA Rugby's women's program as a consultant, and also worked with a few independent players who had aspirations to go to the Rio Olympics, and one of them went to the Olympics, and 2 sadly didn't make it, but that was both across the men's and the women's program. So I got a little bit of exposure to the sort of rugby sevens over there, which is great. Had my youngest daughter in Seattle in 2015, and I guess a little bit of a family decision was move back to the UK and be nearer her family. So we kind of bounced back across the pond back to the UK. I got a job in professional cricket, which was a fun experience. I mean, maybe we can share some of that as we go throughout the interview. I only had a year. I had a year in county cricket, which was, like I say, pretty fun and positive experience for me in hindsight. I ended up winning, the players won the T20 in 2016, which was fun. Then I made this sort of secondary choice to move into academia for a period of time, which is where I obviously met Dan.
Dan.
3 years at the University of South Wales, teaching or lecturing in strength and conditioning. And again, it was a nice opportunity for me to kind of, I guess, audit my professional practice and reflect on my coaching career, as well as, look to kind of coaching and mentorship of young aspiring coaches. So there was lots of positives. There's a few negatives as well, but we might not dwell on those too much at this point. Yeah. But I guess the coaching itch was something I kind of wanted to continue to scratch after having 3 years out and doing some part-time coaching on the side to kind of offset the main job, I guess. I had an opportunity to go back to America with Major League Rugby. Major League Rugby is only sort of 3 years old, going into its 4th season in 2021 now. And I wanted to sort of get back into full-time coaching, and Seattle Seawolves was the opportunity for me. I've still got kind of capability to work in the US, so I traveled back there during or pre-COVID-19, and now it's the handbrake's being pulled up. Everyone's just waiting for sport and professional sport, particularly, to sort of restart across the world. And I guess it's off season now, and looking to go back to the US in November and see what happens in preparation for the season 4, which is technically going to be season 3. So it's an interesting time in American rugby. That's the sort of short version. 5 minutes of working over 25 years.
So I'm sure we'll touch on a lot of the points that you brought up then, but I think one of the big things that coaches especially worrying about now is how are others with the whole COVID-19 break off and the extended off season, how have you adapted some of your training now to give to the players while we are in this extended off season to make sure that they are coming back and like firing fit when they do come in and are prepped for competition?
Yeah, I mean, I guess contextually it's a little bit different. So the US system, like most of the sports in the US, there's relatively long off seasons anyway. So I think the challenge we've all got, and I'll get to your answer in a minute. I think the challenge you've got is that, especially with the MLR, where the league is very, very embryonic and young, you've got a lot of players coming from South Africa, New Zealand, Australia, even some of the sort of young British players as well going into that league now. You've not really got an opportunity over the summer, for example, to sort of remote program.
Right.
And I can get onto that in a minute. But I mean, the reality is it's a massive, massive challenge for everybody concerned. And I think the biggest issue we have is that because people are spread all over the world and you haven't got control over them contractually for 12 months a year, especially in that particular league's context, that you can send as much kind of homework out to do as you like. But the reality is that the responsibility of staying in condition in the off season particularly lies with the player and the player's diligence to train. So, for example, now in the ideal or in the real world outside of COVID-19, the season ends on June 28th or whatever the playoff final would be. The players are then, as you'd expect, especially with player welfare, are given, time off to recover and, mentally and physically regenerate after what is a pretty exhausting 6 months, particularly in the MLR. And then you're looking at kind of reintroducing training September, October, November in an unstructured and in an informal manner. And then it's meeting up for December, January as pre-season, and then hitting the next season running in February. So I guess, we haven't really got control over them between now and November. But I guess you also got to think as a professional player, you've got to take responsibility and ownership for staying in relatively good condition whilst also enjoying some rest and recovery and, having a bit of fun, which is what I guess most young 20-somethings want to do when they've got time off and they're away from their kind of vocation.
Yeah. And that mental break is almost more important than the physical break sometimes when you're at that
massive
sport.
Yeah, and I think that's one of the big benefits of playing rugby in North America at the moment. I think the competition standard's getting better year on year from what I gather. I've only been involved one season. But also it's more about the monotony of training and the mentality. I know a lot of players from my time working in England and Wales who the physical element of training was something they really enjoyed, but it was the mental aspect that was the bit that was more fatiguing. And I think that's something that's starting to become a little bit more prevalent now in sort of that holistic management of players, that it's not just the physical that's the problem. It's also, it's looking at the whole. And I know Dan would have been bored to death in some of my lectures around, well, no, it's just like the four quadrants of management. It's, you've got the tactical, you've got the technical, you've got the physical, and you've got the psychological. And a lot of people are now paying much more attention to the socio-psychological elements as well as the physical and the tactical and technical. And I think a lot of people in the past have just, especially in coaching in terms of strength and conditioning and performance, they've always focused on their little wheelhouse of strength and conditioning and not thought in that bigger picture regarding how exhausting it is mentally. And that's something that I think is becoming much, much more prevalent in performance sport now. It is that psychological element. It's not about admitting a level of weakness, for example. It's much more about, okay, well, performance is really, really, what is the mental cost? And I think people are starting to think about that much more seriously now.
Do you think that, like you said, they kind of like left to their own sort of like devices now? Players like, or athletes at that level have a sort of different outlook in regards to like coming from like a behavioral standpoint, where they feel that it's less of like a chore for them to do, the stuff themselves, rather than sort of, they've got that responsibility as an athlete to continue their development while like everything's like they haven't got a coach there to kind of keep them accountable. Do you feel like there's a difference with like players at the highest level in regards to like their behavior to sort of like players maybe on a semi-professional or maybe, you know, lower level of sport?
Yeah, I mean, I guess that the best players that I've ever had the opportunity to work with have taken ownership of their own development, whether that's as a rugby player or as an athlete or a combination of both. And even professional players, some of them don't like training. They've got enormous talent. They've got ability. I just think in this day and age, if you don't take ownership and you don't have that personal accountability to sort of some level of standard, then you're not actually going to be employed very long, because someone will basically take your place.
Yeah.
So I think there's an ownership and there's a level of necessity, I guess, to stay in condition if it is your job. And the very, very best will look after themselves to that much of a high level anyway. But it is hard. I mean, I can send out remotely as much information as possible about training, about lifestyle, about, you know, performance supplementation, whatever it might be. But you as a player have to have those, like you say, those behaviors, those desires and those ambitions and motivations to get up and train or do the right thing as a professional. Do you want to do your 15 minutes mobility every day? Do you want to eat for 90% of the time the way you expect an athlete to eat? You have to make those choices as a player. And actually, for me personally, as a coach of relative experience, I guess, the longer I've coached, the more I've kind of tried to provide as much autonomy as possible for the player. And by that, I mean, build a relationship with a player to the point where you're not making them do anything. I don't want to make a player do anything they don't want to do. What I have to do is almost be a mentor, be someone who's a sounding board who can say, listen, do you want to extend your career? Do you want to play another 2 years in the top flight? Do you want to play another 3 years? Do you want to look after your body? Well, that's on you. Do you want to do your recovery at the end of the day when you want to just get in your car and go home? Do you want to spend that 15 extra minutes in the, you know, whatever recovery modality you're going to take? You know, do you want to wait and half an hour to have your soft tissue because, you know, inevitably you haven't got 25 soft tissue therapists, so you've got to sit around and wait? Are you prepared as a player to wait 15 minutes to get essentially a free massage?
Yeah.
Or do you want to jump in your car and do you want to jump away? And the reality is the best players will do what's required to remain at that elite level. And there aren't as many as you think in that respect, but the best have certainly got the traits that allow them to take ownership and have personal accountability for their development. And we are just a vehicle to support. We are support staff. At the end of the day, we support their goals and their needs.
Yeah, so like you said, where you wouldn't necessarily make an athlete do anything in particular, that, you know, almost suggests that there's like a collaborative sort of relationship in regards to the programming and coaching. Would you say that then makes that athlete, you know, more competent at going about their sort of like, you know, programming themselves? For example, you have those sort of like in the gym or, you know, passing conversations where, you know, like you have that sort of like mentorship and consultancy with the player. Would you say that, you know, enables them to kind of be more independent with their own sort of training?
Absolutely. I think one of the things that, especially my motivations as a coach, is almost to get to the point where, I mean, a friend of mine in America, we talk about it quite often. It's the ITA, the independent thinking athlete. And what you want, you don't obviously want to make yourself redundant, because that's not good. That's not good to pay the mortgage. But that is in essence what you want to be doing as a coach. So I'll give you an example here, which is quite a relevant and good one. So there's some of those really good, don't name drop, but I probably will.
Name drop ahead. Name drop ahead.
No, okay. So you got Sam Warburton, for example. So Sam and I go back to 2004. Fully engaged in the training process, maybe not so much in his early academy days, but in terms of investing in strength and conditioning and how passionate he now is about strength and conditioning and fitness himself. Sam kept a log of pretty much all his training from when he entered the academy until when he exited, you know, professional rugby at 2017, 2018. So there's a player, and he's not the only one. I'll name another one. There's Bradley Davis at the Ospreys, who's played 50, 60 times for Wales. Bradley Davis came in and did a pre-season in USW only a couple of years ago, whereby he had done his own programming to look after himself in the off season. And what I would consider a relatively well-structured, well-organized, well-planned program was put out in front of me. And I was relatively impressed, especially as you know, Bradley as a character. He's a kind of fun, bouncy, jovial type guy who you wouldn't have thought had really paid that much attention to the training process. But what he did, he had kept a record, same as Sam, all the sort of training that they've done over the years. And they got to a point in their career, both obviously about 30 years old, where they could pretty much, without a coach, manage and look after themselves pretty successfully to get into the right condition to play rugby at the highest level. Yes, they'd still want that coaching sounding board. It's almost like, and I know Dan's heard these reference points before, you know, Ashley Jones, the S&C coach who used to work at the Crusaders in New Zealand and work for the All Blacks in Australia. He would be a guy who would have the quadrants of management, whereby you end up getting into quadrant 4. You've basically got players of the highest caliber not requiring your services anymore. They are totally able to program for themselves. Sorry, guys, I know this is going to ruin the pod, but the dog barking next door is bugging me. I'm going to move. Yeah, it's one of those things where you just, if you invest in the process yourself as a player, you'll end up being able to look after yourself. And I'm sure, I guess the other one, and I wasn't immersed in the environment, but I'm sure that Toulon, in their pomp between I think whenever they were winning Heineken Cups back to back, 2013 to 2015, you had a number of players who, without a shadow of a doubt, had the ability to get themselves ready for high level competition on a day-to-day basis. And they didn't need a coach, but the coach is just there as a really good sounding board to maybe share ideas. And like Dan said at the front end of this question, just that collaborative approach. I think as I got older as a coach, I got more experience about dealing with players who had sort of more specific and more individual needs. You end up being a better communicator because players like to do certain things to get ready for game day. And who am I as a coach to tell someone who's got 20, 30, 40, 50 test caps, oh no, you're doing it wrong, you need to do it this way. And that approach to performance and to getting someone ready for performance is something I spent a lot of time thinking about, especially around the 2007, 2010 mark, when I had conversations with some fairly high profile players at the Cardiff Blues. It made you a better coach because you're actually asked to think more about, who am I doing this for? Am I doing it for me as a coach, or am I doing it for them as a player? Yeah. And as soon as you think about being a support staff member, doing it for them, you'll end up giving them a much better service, because it's not just about, oh yeah, you've got to squat because, you know, squat's the king of lower body exercise. Oh no, you've got to power clean because someone in a textbook 20 years ago said that's the best way to produce and absorb force. It's like, well, no, actually, these guys are running into each other at, you know, up to 10 meters per second at times. It's like, that might not be what's best for them at that particular time in their career. So you've got to think a little bit more flexibly. And I think that was one of the things, funnily enough, I did a podcast a couple of weeks back, and a guy asked me about what's my sort of pet hate. And the one answer I went back was program rigidity. Because you cannot, especially when you're working with combat sports, and I know Dan's got an interest in the UFC and mixed martial arts and, you know, sports that, you know, guys get injured. Everyone gets injured in various sports. You cannot have the program rigidity whereby you have to make people do anything they don't want to do. If you're starting to have those conversations, you're starting to have a really fractured relationship with an athlete or with a player. So I think those are important things to think about as young coaches develop their career, that there's more than one way to develop strength in the lower body. It doesn't have to be a back squat, for example. And there's obviously methods are many, but principles are few, that kind of old adage.
Yeah, and I think coming from university, where the big onus is on trying to perfect the whole process, and I think that's what you go to uni for, is to understand the principles, like you said, about developing strength, developing speed. And a lot of the assignments we do is looking in the literature, looking for the best option. And as someone relatively new coming into the field, like I've just graduated from uni now, there is that onus in education that sometimes, like, you're looking for the perfect exercise. So for my dissertation, it was comparing the high bar squat versus the low bar squat in scrummaging, and which one is more relatable. But at a certain point with the literature, I feel that a big emphasis is placed on that's the starting point to look. And as a coach, you tend to develop your your hindsight along with your experience. So what's some things that you started off coming into the industry with, and you said you started as a PT coming into strength coach. What's some of your initial philosophies that you thought were correct back in the day, and then you've like molded and made and changed now back to where you are in line with your philosophies at the minute?
Good question. Yeah, I mean, I guess I sort of answered it a little bit ago. The challenge was, when I was a young strength and conditioning coach, all I thought, or all I was interested in, was making a player faster, bigger, stronger, whatever the physical KPIs of performance happened to be at the time. So there was a lot of onus on a lot of kind of accountability laid down to, right, the so-and-so's got to be this size, this fast, this big, this strong, whatever it might be. That was all relatable back to KPIs for strength and conditioning. Whereas as I've evolved and I've got better and as I got better and older and more experienced, I've looked at every single thing I do as a strength and conditioning coach is to make a player better at the sport. So for me, it might actually be doing less strength and conditioning. Yeah. So I've had conversations, and I tweeted at the weekend. I saw the number 8 for whatever it was, Auckland Blues, throw that 15-meter left-hand pass, missed 2 into the court, into the winger's hand, scored in the corner. And I basically said, listen, young players looking at this video, don't worry about the physical capacities of the player, but worry about the skills. If you want to make anything you work on, make it your left-hand pass over the summer. And anyway, the long and the short of it is, like I said, I used to be obsessed with, he squats more, he runs faster, he's fitter, he must be better. Whereas you've got to now, for me anyway, think much more bigger picture. Yeah. Is what I'm doing for that player making them a better player, not necessarily making them a better athlete. So that would be things like nutrition, things like robustness, things like, are they getting soft tissue work done? Things that I can't measure, well, apart from obviously body composition, but I can't measure in tangible terms. Oh yeah, because they get more, they do their recovery better.
Yeah, they're making a better player.
Yeah. Well, I can measure it, but you can get obsessed with monitoring then. But the reality is, I moved away from just being obsessed with physical KPIs, and I became much more interested in, am I making this player better?
Yeah, and
ultimately, I want them to be better athletes. Don't get me wrong, of course I do. But I also, if you can't catch and pass, if you keep missing tackles, if you can't pass that off your left hand, how are you going to be a better rugby player?
Yeah, and
so it's that integration. I mean, again, another examples are important. I think I had a guy who could like hex bar deadlift 300 kilos, run a sub 5 40-meter sprint. Athleticism to back, but his job as a rugby player, he wasn't very good at. He obviously lost professional contract because he loved training, and there's absolutely no problem with loving training, but you've got to apportion your training time appropriately. And if you are physically gifted and you have athleticism, you have strength, you have all the physical qualities, but you don't have your tactical and technical qualities nailed down, unfortunately, as a professional rugby player, you'll lose your job. And that sadly has happened on various occasions with the same player from different professional teams, because he'd work on his strengths and not work on his weaknesses. And I'm all for working your strengths, but you've also got to make sure that you train the training gap. And the training gap for this particular player was tactical and technical, not physical. And then obviously that impacts on psychological as well. So that for me would be, any lesson for young coaches would be, become slightly less obsessed with the physical KPIs and think about that holistic development as a person, as a player. And you'll be more connected to the player, you'll be more connected as a coach, and you'll probably get more outcomes.
Yeah, so if you are a young coach coming in, there is a lot of pressure, because at the minute with strength conditioning, it is a job that sometimes can be very short, or if you're doing a good job, can lead you for the rest of your career in one spot. But I think as a young coach, how would you go about the pressures of like management, because they want to see improvements in this? So the management will come to you, how are you making these players better? And usually, if you're an S&C coach, you've got the squat scores going up, the speed scores, and they're all related to the, like you said, the KPIs within rugby. How would you take that pressure away from coaches to focus on those and try and relay back to management that sometimes that even though you might not see an increase in a certain squat score or a sprint time, how do you relay that they are getting better from what you're doing?
Yeah. Okay. So I guess it's about your communication skills with the management team, but also two, I guess, if you have got good quality communication skills and you sit around the table and you discuss players and individual player development programs, then inevitably some of the conversation is going to lead you to, okay, here's the physical KPIs, here's the tactical and technical KPIs, here's maybe some psychological assistance, whatever. It's going back to those 4 coactives of performance, and it's also having the conversation, and not being as a whole management team. Everybody should be focused on making the player better. So, like I said in the sort of previous answer, if you've got the communication skills and you're having the conversations with coaches, and they have an understanding that what you're doing is trying to improve a player, not improve an athlete, then inevitably that will, to some degree, take some of the pressure off anyway.
Yeah.
But you've got to be able to have the conversation to start with. But also, you'd like to think that even through having a more holistic, global appreciation of performance, you've still got to, as a strength and conditioning coach, look at your own performance KPIs really, and have some sort of evidence trending in the right direction.
Yeah.
So you might say, for example, right, we're doing a heavy strength training block. We're going to see jump scores and speed scores potentially in the short term, just dip slightly before we, you add your intensification and you add some sort of intensity to the programming as opposed to volume, and you'll see those scores bounce back and you'll see improvements in, say, jump height or sprint speed, whatever it might be. But like I say, if you have the ability to converse with your management group, you'll be able to have those conversations along the lines of, here's my strategic plan. This is what I tend to see here. This is the trend, but this is what's going to happen in 2 to 3 months' time when almost that kind of strength lag gets caught up. And if that's your priority training at the time, then you'll see, once you've once you've kind of gone out of your accumulation phase into your intensification phase, you'll see improvements in the physical qualities that you want to see going onto the field. But you've also got to allow yourself a little bit of time and that conversation point to get yourself in a position where, as long as you've explained your rationale, you should, with a good relationship with your head coach, be able to explain, no, this is why we're doing this, and this is the reason for it. And if in 2 months' time, when we start the competitive season, we'll be in a much better place physically. And then you've obviously got to evidence that with your monitoring and your testing.
Yeah, so it's all about that communication and rationale behind it, and just explaining that sometimes that you might be taking like one little step back in a certain area to then push going into say the competition block then, where it's just that little modification where you're going to see a little dip and then come back.
Yeah, you're going to see some residual fatigue from accumulation of load. So the reality is, unless you're taking the foot off the gas, especially during, say, a period of pre-season, you're not going to see the numbers keep going up and up and up. The training load, the way that you're monitoring your players, there's so many little moving parts to this that at some point you're not going to see continual improvement.
Yeah. And we've chatted a bit about the whole strength conditioning side of thing, but I think we wanted to try and bring you on this podcast to help bridge the gap between strength coach and PT. So
Right.
I feel that personal training is becoming a growing industry at the minute as well. And there's so many people that want to come into the field. There's so many different avenues for PTs to try and educate themselves and get into the role. But I almost feel that there's a gap between someone looks at the strength coach as a general pop and they think, well, I don't need a strength coach, for example, because I'm just me. I don't really need the strength coach qualities. But in reality, I feel like everyone should, in essence, try and be a strength coach, because a strength coach isn't developing like the whole PT is, oh, let's get a six pack, this and that. A strength coach is developing these lifelong qualities that help you become better at what you do. And whether that be general pop, just being someone that needs to pick the kids up and be able to do the shopping unassisted and things like that. So how would you try and go about bridging the gap between the whole PT and strength coach?
Cool. Good question. I mean, it is a challenging one, and I think that the hardest thing to get your head around in this particular area is ego. And I've basically over the last 20 years been a PT, a strength and conditioning coach, a PT again. If you're working one-on-one with a player, are you a PT or are you a strength and conditioning coach? If you're working with Joe down the street, you taking one hat off to put the other hat on. I just think we're basically fitness professionals, and it just depends on how you want to characterize what one versus the other. I also think the challenge you've got there, just going off on a tangent a little bit, I think personal training on reflection was a great opportunity to build relationships, maintain a lot of good quality communication skills, work hard to have obviously client retention. So for me anyway, personally, I was thinking along the lines of more of a business than I was as a sort of strength coaching practitioner, for example. But also I think it's massively about listening to what the person who's in front of you needs. And it's all well and good. You and I are not saying, I used to have a six pack, but I think a lot of the perception of the industry is that the person in front of you wants to train the way you train. And I think that for me, my personal lessons and my personal kind of reflections on personal training was, I was training at the time maybe for vanity, but are they training to remain pain-free, for example? Are they training because they, like you say, want to, live life unassisted? I think it's about listening and building a program around their goals. And I think I've seen a lot of social media over the last 2 to 3 years, particularly about these things like you must squat, you must deadlift, you must do this, you must do that, you must almost train like a powerlifter. And general pop don't want to do that. So again, it goes back to your overall philosophy and your program rigidity, and not trying to PT people that are kind of coming to you for advice the way you want to train as a person. I think that'd be the one biggest thing, and the one biggest takeaway I'd look to do is listen really, really closely to what the person in front of you wants and build your programming around that, not about how you train and how you want to train and how you think people want to look. Because that's got to be one of the biggest mistakes ever, that a 50-year-old, I mean, I'm nearly 50 now, but a 50-year-old lady might not want to look and train the way I train. I mean, I still want to train like as much as I can, like an athlete, for example. Yeah. Whereas they, like you say, they might just want to not wake up in the morning with a sore back, with, tight shoulders, whatever it might be. And an integration of what they need as opposed to what you think they want is a massive, massive learning curve for me. And actually having the program flexibility to override what you think they want to do and actually really listen intently to what they want to do and program accordingly. And I think I spoke to a personal trainer not so long back. We're talking over the last sort of 12 to 18 months. And I got talking about squat regressions. And unfortunately, in terms of knowledge gap, the person I was speaking to didn't have any regressions from a back squat. And I thought that was pretty scary. I thought that was pretty scary as someone in the fitness industry. If you haven't got the ability to tell me, how to regress a back squat into, whatever it may be, I'm not going to give away the answers. But I just thought, if you've only got back squat in your locker and someone gets hurt back squatting, it's like you could have easily modified that programming to make sure that at entry level, that person was basically using the squat pattern in a pain-free manner, using a different variation as opposed to, oh no, everyone's got a back squat. Yeah. And there's a ton of reasons why that person might not have been able to back squat efficiently and comfortably. And that for me is that, like you say, expanding that knowledge gap or filling the knowledge gap is absolutely enormous. And that may be the differentiator between a strength and conditioning coach, maybe and a personal trainer. And you can still get S&C qualifications in a weekend, but you can obviously get PT qualifications in a weekend as well. So the worry is that we've there you go. It's lockdown. Kids walk into the room. It's all good. No, I mean, there lies one of the biggest challenges, and I guess it comes back to education. Are you in the personal training industry because you like training? Are you in the strength and conditioning industry because you like training? or do you have a real passion for helping and serving other people? And both can be pretty lucrative businesses. But I know I'm rambling a little bit. The other thing I would suggest in personal training is the model. The model actually, when you're young, might be great. You might be making 25, 30 pounds an hour, whatever it is. But in reality, the longer you do PT, you're actually fairly inefficient unless you're based in the same kind of training space at any one time. Because when you factor in programming in this day and age, social media marketing, when you're factoring in all the other things that go into building and keeping a personal training business, actually personal training is a pretty inefficient way of, you know, making a living. Yeah. When you think about the new way of kind of building a business in fitness, particularly, it's small group training. There's inevitably a huge emphasis now, especially in COVID-19, but even beforehand, of online training and being able to scale your business. So if you've only got 12 hours a day to be a PT and you're working with one person at a time, you're actually limiting the amount of income you can earn based off the fact that it's a fairly rigid business model, as opposed to having a slightly more diverse, say, portfolio of service offerings. So you can offer, even now, I mean, even when things reopen, I know a PT down in the Southwest, he's going to keep doing his Zoom PT, because he has 15 or 20 people on the Zoom training session in the front room at 5, 6, 7, 8 quid a time, whatever it might be. He's able to scale his business and impact on many more people by still remaining kind of active in the online sphere, because he's thought outside of, okay, well, I'll offer small group training. I will offer private personal training to, say, the more, the more diligent people who he really wants to work with. And he'll also then open out his kind of revenue streams to the online market, to the small group training market, to the PT market, so that actually you're diversifying your options to earn a living as well. Yeah. And obviously earn more per hour.
So ultimately, like young coaches getting into the field, would you say, because I know when I started the whole S&C sort of like career path, I immediately went down the personal training route. Would you say that for new coaches, you know, looking for experience, would you say that PT is a viable or good option in regards to like coaching out? But like you said, you develop those communication skills. If the ultimate goal was to work with, I don't know, elite or different athlete populations, would you say personal training is a viable experience outlet for young coaches, especially massively, if they just continue and study?
No, massively. I mean, the reality is you're honing your coaching skills in a much less stressful environment. I mean, I think the challenge you've got as a PT, as an S&C, is that if you're thrown into a team sports setting, you've got, say, 20 to 30 people to manage as opposed to one.
Yeah.
So in terms of developing your coaching eye in personal training, you've got one-on-one. You've got the ability to look at faulty movement patterns. You've got an ability to make connections one-on-one. You've got an ability to really, really intently focus on one person. And from that, you should hope to shape the way you can coach and manage in a slightly bigger group.
Larger space, yeah.
Larger space, more people, you know, command the presence in the room, whatever it may be, and build confidence. And I think those things are massive. And like I say, the great thing about personal training is it is a rapport building industry as well. You've got to engage with people. You've got to make conversation. And as we all know, in this 21st century, so many people are sort of stuck with their heads in their phones, and the ability to converse and the ability to communicate are kind of I'm not saying they're lost arts, but people who've spent most of their time on, you know, devices haven't got the ability to communicate effectively. And it's one thing. Personal training is an absolutely brilliant avenue to build relationships. And I mean, I still have conversations with my first personal training client I still speak to. That's going back 24, 25 years. And I have very good relationship with 2 or 3 others. And I haven't been a personal trainer since 2000. Mm. So I've built relationships with people that I still have conversations with. And that has allowed me to become a better coach, because the fastest way to get output and productivity out of a player is build relationship with them. So I'd say PT is a great avenue to start that and build confidence. You know what you're looking for then in a fault, and you'll find plenty of faults in squat, lunge, hinge, you know, all all the kind of fundamental patterns of movement, you will find faults in all general, for the most part, all general pop, which will then help you as a coach developing, your coaching eye for more elite populations, for example.
Especially if you've kind of got to like build somebody from absolutely nothing in regards to like movement competency, starting from the bottom and developing someone to like a decent standard can't hurt you as a coach, I'd imagine. No. But going back to what you said about, the 21st century and the technology and stuff, what would you say young coaches or new coaches who've got working in their favour, developing as a practitioner compared to when you initially started in the field effectively? What did you have working in your favour? What were some of the hindrances back then? And what and vice versa?
Got to go back a long way, mate. Got to go back a long way. I mean, I guess, the reality for me was that the internet was literally just on the cusp of being invented back in my day. I mean, we didn't have the internet when I was at uni. That gives away how old I am. But I guess we didn't have the distraction. We didn't have the Instagram generation. So we had to go and find it out for ourselves. So we spent hours and hours coaching. We spent hours and hours, you had to go to the library to get the journal articles, for example. We didn't have the access to the information that we've got now. And one of the biggest challenges we've got from a 21st century practitioner it's just the filter, Dan. It's just that noise, we all know without, I don't think I've sworn yet, the bullshit. There's so much rubbish on the internet now. It's unbelievable. But there's also so much gold. You've just got to have the filter to find, or to make sure you can find the gold and you can filter the rubbish. Because the Instagram coach who's got 150,000 followers might be doing some really, really great training that's not captured on this 15-second or the 1-minute video that's put online. Yeah. And there's times when you see some absolutely ridiculous things, but they're getting it's sort of the clickbait mentality. But the fundamentals of a program may be absolutely being adhered to in the programming for the most part of say a 1-hour session, but you're seeing a snapshot. And I think one of the biggest challenges we've got as an industry is people making comments on the social media posts without context. Yeah. And I've been guilty of this in the past. I've seen I've seen a football montage and people are doing some what is perceived as ridiculous things. But you're seeing a montage that's being chopped up. You don't have any contextual understanding of where that kind of video sits within the whole grand scheme of all the programming. For the most part, they might have 99% of their program nailed down, but you just see something that looks or is perceived as not what you'd consider optimal, and everyone's got an opinion. That's the biggest challenge. I think just filtering the tsunami of information is the hardest possible challenge, and you'll know this as a student of a master's level. I can give you every paper under the sun. I can give you 1,000 articles to read on any given subject in strength and conditioning. How do you assimilate that? How do you process that? How do you use your critical thinking and your evaluation to go, actually, this whole, say, for example, hamstring injury puzzle piece, how am I going to be anywhere near contributing to fixing this problem? And you've got thousands of people writing articles on hamstring injuries on a year by year basis. But we still, as a profession, haven't solved the hamstring injury, conundrum. Yeah. So it's like, who's right, who's wrong? Is it just about the hamstring, or is it, again, going back to the sort of overall philosophy? Is it a global thing? Is it too difficult to solve on an individual level when there's 1,000 moving parts in the performance puzzle? Do you know what I mean?
That goes into like my next point that I was going to bring up is the amount of evidence out there. I know definitely one of my initial struggles was blending that sort of like evidence to practice, and how much of the evidence out there is relevant to real world situations. For example, like in-depth biomechanical analysis papers, how would you then digest that information, sum it down, translate that in a coaching environment where it would have any effect on, the people you're working with? So would you say that it's almost a hindrance, the just sheer amount of new information coming out like day after day after day?
Yeah, I think it's a really, really big challenge in the industry. I think it always comes down to and always boils down to where you are contextually within a specific environment, but also time. Have you got time in the real world to apply some of the academic papers that are being published? And I think
Yeah.
that's where people like Ben Jones, who works at Leeds Beckett, is brilliant. He's trying to plug the gap between practical application and theoretical understanding. And without a shadow of a doubt, the theoretical understanding of sports science and strength and conditioning is getting more and more in depth on a year-to-year, week to week, month-to-month, year-to-year basis. But I think the challenge is applying some of the academic content that's published is just not feasible in the real world. And
No.
it takes a relatively experienced practitioner to sift through what's relevant, apply what's relevant, and disregard what's not practically applicable to apply. It's just some of the things are going to be impossible.
Yeah.
And they are, and people are making a living and making a career out of publishing very, very good quality academic work, but that has very little applicability for real world performance sport, for example. There's not enough time in the day to do, force plate analysis on 40 people, then biomechanical analysis on the same kind of work, and then looking at the biochemical, related elements of that same activity, whatever it might be. The list absolutely on what's researched and what's being published, but it's also, like you said, have the filter. You've got to make sure that within your contextual constraints, you can apply an element of what's most important, and then you've got to prioritize, because we haven't got time as practitioners to do absolutely everything that's being published, and that's part of being that critical thinker, and that's part of being.
I think we break it up a little bit.
Challenge.
Yeah, I think the connection.
Have you got me?
You're coming in and out a second. Yeah, we're back. I think. Technology's not always great.
Yeah, you're filtering in and out at the minute. I think that's a bit better now. Seems to be a bit more stable.
We still.
You got me?
Great.
Yeah, we got you.
Yeah, that's better.
Right.
You've got the lockdown hair in there, mate. Oof, scary.
Yeah.
Hopefully that's. Are you just going to publish the voice?
Well, we get a visual on on YouTube.
YouTube style.
Yeah, and we've got SoundCloud and Apple Podcasts too. So
don't worry, most of our listeners come from Spotify anyway. So
yeah,
we only have the odd few on YouTube.
Lovely, it's fine. I'm not that vain anymore.
So
could be worse.
I think I want to bounce back a little bit where you said about the whole filter, and as S&C coaches, you've got to develop that bullshit detector really to do. And I think being in the profession, the longer you're in strength and conditioning, the more that bullshit detector becomes fine-tuned. But I feel like one of the biggest problems with personal training at the minute is trying to fine-tune their bullshit detector a little bit, because a lot of people, well, the majority of people spend 8 hours plus on their phone a day, especially now we're stuck in lockdown. And like you said, with social media being a growing market for the whole personal training and online coach, with a lot of shit going out there. And then people get their expectations from social media about what they should be doing in their own training. And then they come to a personal trainer and be like, well, I've seen this online. Why am I not doing this? And you can rationalize it all you want, but at some point, some people just see something and they're held on to that belief because someone said it that they maybe look up to or like to watch. How do you manage general pop's expectations when it does come to training?
Yeah, no, it's a massive challenge, and that is one of the things that I guess we've all got to overcome as practitioners. And I guess the best advice would be, again, it goes back to the PT really into what they want. Ultimately, you as a coach have your belief system, and that's absolutely fine. But what you've almost got to try and do is, what does my mate say? Is Nick Grantham, great practitioner, 25 years down the road as well. You've got to eat your broccoli before you have your ice cream. So with that analogy in mind, is it going against your kind of integrity as a coach to give your paying customer something that they want, as long as you give them something that you want. So, for example, you hopefully are following the principles of strength and conditioning, or even principles of personal training, whatever the difference is, I've no idea. And you've got your squat pattern, your hinge pattern, your brace, your rotate, your lunge, whatever it might be. You're for the most part of that 1 hour training session or whatever they're paying for, you give them what they need, but you've also got to give them what they want. And if they want, I don't know what, battle ropes, standing on a Bosu ball, juggling whatever, latest gadget they might want to be juggling with, do you give them 5 minutes of that and they get 55 minutes of high quality training? It's almost, I think the best way to put that, the analogy from Nick is great. You've got to eat your broccoli before you have your ice cream.
Yeah.
So it's almost, as a coach, you're responsible for the well-being of that person for the time that they're spending with you and they're paying for. So you want them to get better at what they're paying you to get better at. But also, in terms of client retention, you've got to give them the ice cream.
Yeah.
And it might be going against everything that you think about as a coach. But also, it's about psychology and setting your ego aside to maintain relationships, and also over time sell what you're providing as a service is better without the juggling act or the circus training or whatever you want to define the kind of the junk as.
Yeah.
And it's a big challenge because the amount of circus training on social media is relatively high and people will see it. But the fundamental quality strength and conditioning or service provision as a personal trainer will not have the rubbish. But you've got to at some point sort of filter that out as well from the mentality of from the client, and that's part of your coaching role. You've got to build and share your rationale to the point where it's so much more compelling what you want them to do versus what they think they need to do. And ultimately, if you get them to consistently buy into what you're trying to achieve and they get the results, then you'll have them sold anyway. You with me?
Yeah, it's like that buy-in.
Challenging time. Buy-in's massive.
Yeah.
But also, you've got to give them the ice cream. If they want the ice cream, especially a client who's new to you as a coach, you've got to give them the ice cream, but they've got to have the meat and potatoes and the broccoli first.
Exactly.
And how you chop that up in your program design, that's down to you as a skilled operator to try to give them as much of the high quality stuff and as little as the low quality stuff as possible. But I think if you want to retain clients, sometimes you've got to give them the ice cream, but they can't have the ice cream first.
I like that. I
Right.
like that.
Yeah.
I'm going to be using that analogy.
Yeah. No, Nick. Give Nick Grantham credit. He's a good lad. He knows his stuff.
Cheers, Nick.
Yeah.
I think.
Oh, go on, Dan.
Go on, because I was going to move on to a separate topic.
Yeah, so I think I just wanted to bounce back to that a bit because of the whole social media. But I think when we started getting into literature, there's obviously a big topic of conversation around the whole velocity-based training side of things.
This is what I was just going to get into now.
See, great minds think alike. And with
Never
VBT,
heard of it.
Well, I'd heard of it, but I haven't really done much research into it because with a maths background, you look at the percentages and things, and it's become really outdated at the minute. But obviously, there's been some research behind the whole like percentages based with the whole Prilipin's table, and you've got the perfect intensities for the perfect scenario. But as we found out, it is no perfect scenario.
Human physiology is not that simple, I'm afraid.
No, and I think with someone like myself who's interested in the maths and the whole perfect scenario, I've now become acquainted that obviously day-to-day stresses, when you're working with a lot of people, there's so many different stresses for so many different people, and you never get that perfect scenario. So if you could introduce velocity-based training, could introduce velocity-based training to the listeners and give like an elevator pitch on what it is, and then we can delve into a bit more detail, because I know a lot of my powerlifting audience are interested in this side of things.
Oh, no pressure then. Yeah, I mean, ultimately, velocity-based training is the use of a device to give you objectivity and a more accurate measure of kind of a daily readiness to train and a daily readiness to prescribe more optimally, I suppose. So just feeding on from your kind of intro to it, I think the challenge you have in the modern day society is that, like you said, human physiology and the stresses of life are impacting on a day-to-day readiness and your day-to-day 1 rep max. And your 1 rep max from 6 weeks ago is not your 1 rep max from today. So I think the challenge you've got with prescribing percentage-based loading, for example, is that your 1 rep max moves on a day-to-day basis up to about 18%, quote Brian Mann and others. So what in essence that means is if you want to lift at 80% of 1 rep max today, could feel 62% of 1RM, which is a great day, or it could feel like 98% of 1 rep max. So if you're trying to lift 4 to 5 reps at 98% of 1 rep max, chances are you're going to have a fairly miserable day at the under the bar.
Yeah.
So I think the realities for me of velocity-based training is in a very, very brief nutshell. You've got the opportunity to assess a person's readiness to train on any given day and optimally prescribe load based off what today offers. And where that has value for me is that you can add training units together and couple the training process as effectively as possible. So you're still developing strength today, and let's just take 140 kilos as an example in the squat. I'm supposed to do 140 kilos for sets of 5, but based on my readiness to train today and my physiology, it's not going to happen. So I've got to take the weight down to lift within a specific training zone or speed zone. But last week I lifted 140 for 5 sets of 5, no problem. Today I'm going to lift 5 sets of 5 with 125. Am I still developing strength qualities even though I'm lifting 15 kilos less per set than I did last week?
Yeah.
Yes, I am. Because based on the sort of principles around velocity-based training, if you move a bar at a specific speed or in a specific speed zone, you are stressing the body enough to develop the adaptation you're looking for, irrespective of the load lifted. So what that allows you to do is, even though you're lifting less than last week, you're still developing the strength quality for the long-term output, which is developing, for example, in this case, maximum strength. You've also, I guess, with the powerlifting crew in mind, got a much better appreciation of other strength qualities. So speed, strength, and strength speed based off of a velocity zone, not just off a percentage of 1RM. And I think the biggest challenge you've got, and maybe we can delve a little bit deeper, more specifically with some of the questioning around percentage-based training, but you cannot, like I say, you cannot base a training cycle. For me anyway, you can't base a training cycle's loading parameters off your 1 rep max that occurred 3 to 4 or 5 weeks ago. Because like I say, your 1RM is changing on a day-to-day basis, and velocity-based training allows you to assess that strength level on any given day based on your preparation sets, for example, and other things. I do run a course on this stuff, by the way, if you didn't know.
Yeah, we did touch on it on the. We did touch on the VBT workshop we did a little Instagram live the other day to give a little bit of a background on yourself and everything.
Yeah, if you want to
go
away, feel free.
Course is coming soon. Funnily enough, as the lockdown's kind of taken a little bit more shape, the challenge I've got as a coach educator, just if we want to go off topic a little bit on that, is that for me, learning, particularly in strength and conditioning, going back to filtering the noise and the bullshit, you can read, all you like information wise, but in terms of practically immersing yourself in the application, you have to have the opportunity to coach in the real world for me. And that's where online learning and some of the webinars and some of the kind of conferences that have gone on over the last 3 months have been amazing in terms of information exchange. But in terms of real immersive learning and practically applying, there hasn't been the opportunity because people haven't been able to get to face. So in terms of learning more about VBT, I could send you 40 papers today that talk about VBT. But in terms of actually physically immersing yourself in the process of learning about velocity-based training, for me, it has to happen face-to-face and actually feel and actually show and actually do. And I think that's the biggest problem we've got as an industry as well. People are getting sort of online certification, but don't have a real understanding of what they're talking about and what they're doing and what they're and why they're doing it. So in terms of the whole percentage-based, just to filter it back to sort of VBT versus percentage-based training, if you've got a really, really experienced trainer, then the sort of auto-regulatory process can easily adjust. And some people could probably come out with a really effective training session based off their auto-regulatory skills. If they've got a high training age and if they're really quite intuitive around loading. Whereas other people are going to crush themselves week after week and potentially get injured based off not having the knowledge and not having the help with some sort of objective marker for readiness and being able to load adjust accordingly. And I think that's the biggest challenge you have when it comes to sort of like program rigidity. Oh, it's 5x5 today. It's, I've got to do it, and grinding through it, as opposed to lifting to a specific velocity zone where you can be much, much more prescriptive on the weights that you lift based on what you're seeing from some objective data. And that way you're giving the athlete the athlete or player, in my case, in team sport, you're giving the player the best opportunity to make future adaptations week after week after week with consistency, because you're not taking them to technical failure. You're not taking them to sort of that point where they might get injured in the weight room, when your primary concern, especially if you work in team sport, should be keeping your athletes available and healthy. There's plenty of stuff around, reps in reserve and minimum velocity threshold and some of the terminology around that can really help, diligent athletes really get that much more in tune with, how their body functions on a day-to-day basis.
So it's more like looking at progression or just looking at that training output as stimulus-based rather than just a linear progression in load every session.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's where the periodization models of kind of the bygone days have changed as well. And obviously John Keeley and other people's work regarding all those global stresses. It's not just, you can't just factor in the stress of training when it comes to an overall athlete or player load. There is psychological stress, there's financial stress, there's family stress, there's whatever other stress that may or may not be present in everybody in everyday life. It's not just, it's commuter stress. The list goes on. So you can't just factor in sort of physiological stress into somebody's sort of adaptation response. And that's where, again, using objective data, using some technology to integrate to help make the training process that much more optimal is an important kind of new way of thinking around training and optimizing training outcome. And that's where some technology does have high value. And ultimately then again, as a coach, it's about constraints. Have you got the money for XYZ technologies, and which technologies are most relevant to me in my kind of given circumstance and population? That's another massive challenge. Forget about the internet in terms of just the sheer volume of information. You've also got a ton of companies now selling claims and making claims, and budget constraints to, I need a force plate, then I need this, then I need that. It's like, where does it end? And you as a coach has to, again, be analytical to decide on what is relevant and what's not relevant, and what can I use and what can't I use. And if I've, got the money to spend on technology, which one is going to be most wisely kind of giving me the return on investment that I'm after.
Yeah. And I think with the whole technology thing, there's so much out there that people want to invest in, but for myself, like, velocity-based training is something that I want to throw myself into. And like you said, immersing yourself in the whole thing. I've been one that has just kind of gone through the motions, looking at the literature with the whole percentage-based thing, and I haven't really touched on VBT. So that's something that I want to throw myself deep in and try and better educate myself to try and help the audience, because a lot of my people are in that powerlifting side of things, with West Side promoting the whole development of speed as well as strength qualities.
Sure.
But the speed days are based on a percentage that, like you said, can change, and those speed days for me can often turn into max effort grind days if you're not feeling up to it.
VBT is great for those. Yeah, go on.
No, carry on. I'll let you tangent off on this one.
No, VBT is great for the powerlifting crew. Absolutely brilliant. And also bearing in mind, like you say, you've got your strength day, you've got your speed day, you've got your repetition day. It gives you the opportunity to really, really hit the sweet spot on any given day for those particular qualities that they're after. So in terms of being efficient, in terms of being effective, actually VBT for the powerlifting crew could be a really, really valid, not because I've got a course to sell, but genuinely but you've got a very, very diligent training population right there who want to stay healthy. They want to train week in, week out. They want to lift heavy, but also there's times when the repetition method and the speed method is actually going to help impact on their output in terms of the numbers that they lift in their meets and at the top end. And keeping athletes making forward progress is one of the big strengths of velocity-based training. And for me, that audience is without a shadow of a doubt a massive audience for sort of VBT and the education in that area. It's the same with PT. If you want to engage a client, and some people are data-driven in this day and age, give them objectivity, even give them a little dose of VBT within their training session to just engage them that little bit more. Especially, again, it's about the education piece for the client. If, for example, and it's historical, some girls, not all girls, some girls think lifting heavy, the perception is very, very different from what heavy is to what it looks like and what it feels like.
Yeah.
And VBT can be a really, really good tool to actually educate a client that actually that wasn't very heavy because your final rep of that set was at 0.7 meters per second, which tends to suggest that the load wasn't heavy enough to elicit the adaptation we're after. And the objectivity will give you something in front of you where, one, you can basically encourage young or anyone to lift heavier, but also, two, you've got that buffer of knowing where a minimum velocity threshold is on an exercise so that you can actually protect them from themselves as well. You don't want to take them near to failure, but also you want to make sure that you are encouraging them to lift as heavy as they can in any given specific time.
Like
my boy's playing knockdown ginger on the door now. He's knocking on the door and he's running away. It's like lockdown problems, mate. Knockdown problems. But hopefully that gave you a bit of a flavour for the value of VBT and kind of how it can impact positively on any training population, really.
What I've definitely found, like, because obviously, Chris was, you were a uni lecturer of mine, so we had a pretty hefty dose of like the VBT conversations in our lectures, especially like Chris
always plug.
I actually bought myself a push band, and definitely what I found is like using that with like the MMA guys have got streamlines that coaching process a little bit better, because with what I found is like MMA guys like ultimately are the only elite population I've worked with so far. They want to go in that session and literally push the boundaries of like lifting, even though that necessarily might not be the best for them best thing for them on that given day. So what I found is done is like manages expectations and sometimes even like exceeds expectations. So they go in a gym, they feel a certain way. They might be performing like dog shit on that day. If I didn't have that sort of tool to like, back up a rationale and try and convince that athlete, which is arguably the hardest thing, is convincing an athlete and getting a message across saying, look, maybe take a few steps back today. You didn't have the best sleep. You were out on the lash last night. You're not in an optimal place to train. Whereas like, if I didn't have that objective tool to kind of go, it shows in the numbers, and they kind of go, yeah, you are right, to be fair. And then we can go back and then look at more, look, I want you to work in this sort of like velocity threshold today. It gives them that little spark of intent, which can kind of turn the session around. Whereas like a session started on a bad note where they're not in a position to lift as heavy or as fast as they were at a given load, to maybe reducing the load and pushing intent. Do you get me?
Oh, massive. I mean, that's one of the biggest things for me in terms of engaging an athlete or engaging a player, having that intent piece and having a target, for example, can really give you the stimulus and really give you the output that you're after.
Yeah.
It's a massive challenge. And I've never seen any athlete, given a little bit of competitiveness, not try and not work hard.
Yeah.
I think that engagement piece is massive, but also it's about that education piece as well alongside it, and actually going on to have that conversation with that athlete and say, listen, this is the impact of the lifestyle habits that you've got, or this is the impact of the other stresses you've got. If, for example, training load in MMA, it's not just about physical quality development. It's about, your groundwork. It's about your kicking strategy. It's about your stand-up fighting, whatever it might be, those tactical and technical elements. If you've come straight from heavy sparring, for example, to then do your gym session, because ultimately that's the time constraint that you've got. Yeah. You're going to have to, as a coach, modify. Yeah. And the objectivity allows you to modify as successfully as possible. And it might be that you don't lift as heavy or you don't lift as fast this week as you did last week. But ultimately, you're able to make an objective and a quality decision based off some of the data that you're gathering in your preparatory phase of that training session, and modifying the programming accordingly. And that's good coaching. There's going to be times when you're not able to do that if you're just you're basing your decision making off intuition and not basing it off objectivity. Yeah.
Because ultimately that objective is there to solidify the subjective opinions that you might have about that session or that particular exercise.
Sure, dovetail them both together for sure. I mean, that's just me. My battery's running out. It's 21st century problem, see? You need the battery. I'll have to plug it in a minute, but I'll lose my earphones. But no, I hope that gives you a little bit of a flavour. But like I say, without wanting to heavily plug too hard, I'm going to have a few courses going on. I've got one in North Wales. I might have to put one on in South Wales, actually, given that you guys are located down here. I'm keen. Well, no, but I mean, one of the things that I'm doing, even as kind of my academic career came to an end, it wasn't the thing that I wanted to stop Coach Ed. And some of the Coach Ed stuff I've got planned is mainly around velocity-based training, but a few other bespoke events coming in the near future as well. And the reality for me, there is a marketplace for this. There is an appetite for coaches to really immerse themselves and learn about some of the new. I'm saying it's new technology. I mean, push bands and things that are bar mounted, sort of Bluetooth enabled and Wi-Fi enabled gadgetry is the new part. Your linear position transducer, your Tendo units, and your GymAwares have been around a fair few years. But people who really want to develop either their own personal physical development through powerlifting, through Olympic weightlifting, through anyone who wants to train properly and obviously optimize and make their training process as efficient and as effective as possible, can learn from VBT. And like I say, whether that's performance coaches, whether that's people who want to train themselves personally, whether that's personal trainers, the marketplace is huge. And if there is a marketplace for it, I'm happy to develop it and share the experiences that I've had using VBT since kind of early 2000s. Really does make a big difference in my view, anyway. But of course, I'm biased.
Yeah. So a lot of our listeners are, either people who are really sort of like into their training and maximizing the training, or like actual coaches. Where can they find these? Just plug your little workshops. Where can they find the access to these workshops?
Yeah, I mean, I'm on Twitter and I'm on Instagram at ChrisToomb71. Very original. Dan Baker Strength is where you'll find the courses. I mean, I run my courses through Dan Baker Strength and the integration of Push, the technology provider. So the attend a course banner on Dan Baker's page is where you'll find the VBT courses. But like I say, over the next kind of 2 to 3 months, particularly, I'll be looking at marketing the courses going into September, October, and November of this year. I want to try and spread the word as much as I can. Funnily enough, one of your fellow students who's now graduated USW is Estonian. I'm going out to Estonia to run a course. I'm going to go to Slovenia. There's a guy in Germany who wants me to run one out there. There's a guy in Leeds. There's a guy in Sunderland. I'm going to try to dot myself around the whole of the UK, because historically I've kind of delivered out of Cardiff and London. I want to just go, and Manchester. I want to go a little bit further afield and just try to explore the marketplace in other parts of the country as well. So Dan Baker Strength attend a course is kind of where you'll find where the VBT courses are going on in the UK and Europe, and then there's others on a worldwide level as well. But the movement towards VBT is definitely shifting in the right direction, and the percentage-based training kind of guys are getting less and less, which is a win for everybody who takes their training seriously. Really, it's not about us and them; it's about making those who are diligent to train that bit better, that more efficiently, and that much more successfully. Really.
Yeah, you certainly sold me on the old VBT thing. And I'm, like you said, I'm just going to throw myself into it and just get myself a push band, I think, and do a little 12-week block coming into the preseason. So you've got me sold.
Why not? Well, Dan's got about 30 papers. I download 3 or 4 papers a month on VBT, so I must have about 50 by now. So after the show, we'll share some email exchanges and the latest in the literature, and we can go from there.
Yeah,
I will be running a course in October in Cardiff, all being well.
Happy days. Wow. Wicked. Is there any questions?
No, I'm happy. I've got about 4% battery, so
right.
It's
happy days.
Right on cue then.
You're gonna give me the heave ho, but hopefully it's been of some value. I've enjoyed the conversation. It's good for me to reflect on kind of my kind of journey and my pathway and how I can hopefully impact on coaches of the future.
Yeah, awesome.
Yeah, thanks for coming on again.
No worries.
We'll get all the links and stuff in the description and all that. So
brilliant. You might have to cut this bit out. She's run
get the lockdown here.
She don't want to be on TV. Lockdown here. Yeah.
We'll get the lockdown here in the thumbnail.
Superimpose a hat, mate. Superimpose a hat. Yeah, lock it down. I've got a hat in the cupboard. A word from my sponsor. I should have worn it. But anyway, there you go.
Look, nice one.